Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
When Laura moved to a quiet town in Oregon after her divorce, she was just looking for peace, someplace to start over. She rented a modest house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by pine trees and quiet roads, the kind of place where nothing ever seemed to happen. The first weekend after she moved in, she passed a handwritten sign staked to the ground. Yard sale, Saturday only, 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. The arrow pointed toward a long gravel driveway disappearing into the woods. Laura had always loved yard sales, bargains, knickknacks, and sometimes strange little treasures. She figured it would be a good way to meet locals and maybe pick up a few things for her new place. At 8:15 that Saturday morning, she pulled into the narrow driveway. It felt more like a path than a proper road. Trees lined each side, thick and shadowed. After what felt like too long a drive, she came upon a clearing and a small one-story house with a wide porch. Tables were set up in the yard, scattered with old lamps, dishes, clothes, books. Nothing remarkable. An older man stood behind one of the tables, thin, pale, wearing a flannel shirt and a wide smile that never reached his eyes. "Morning," he said, voice raspier than expected. Laura greeted him, and he watched her intently as she browsed. A box of antique dolls caught her eye. They were cracked, faded, all porcelain with glass eyes. Something about them made her skin crawl, but she couldn't look away. "Came from an old estate," the man said, stepping closer. "Family just disappeared, left everything behind." Laura gave a nervous laugh, unsure whether he was joking. "Creepy," she said, and moved on. At the next table, she found a wooden jewelry box. It was intricately carved with roses and vines, and when she opened it, a soft music played, off-key and warped, but strangely beautiful. Inside were faded photographs, yellowed with age, all of a young girl. Same child, different years. In one, the girl stood in front of a house fire. In another, she was in a hospital bed, eyes bandaged. In the last, she was much older, expression blank, holding what looked like a knife. "I'll take this," Laura said quickly, unnerved but intrigued. She handed the man $5, and he wrapped the box in newspaper. As she walked back to her car, she felt his eyes boring into her back. She didn't turn around. That night, she set the jewelry box on her dresser. The music played again, even though she hadn't opened it. Just a soft few notes, almost like it was winding down. She assumed it had been barely triggered by movement. The next morning, she found it open. The photos were scattered on the floor. She was sure she had closed and latched it. By the third night, she began hearing soft footsteps down her hallway. But when she checked, no one was there. On the fifth night, she found the photos arranged in a row at the foot of her bed, and a new one had been added, of her, taken from outside her bedroom window. She went to the sheriff's office, but they were dismissive. "Probably some prank," they said. "That old guy does sales all the time. Bit strange, but harmless." Laura drove back to the house, determined to confront him, to return the box. But when she reached the clearing, it was empty. The tables were gone. The porch had collapsed. The house looked abandoned. Boards missing. Roof partially caved in, completely unlivable. She went to the neighbor's property to ask what had happened. An elderly woman answered the door and narrowed her eyes when Laura mentioned the yard sale. "That place hasn't been occupied in over 10 years, she said. "Belonged to a man named Ronald. He was a bit of a recluse. After his daughter died, burned up in a fire they say he started, he was never the same. Killed himself a few months later." Laura's heart dropped. "What did he look like?" she asked. The woman described him, thin, pale, always in a flannel shirt. Laura didn't sleep that night. The music box wouldn't stop playing. Even unplugged and smashed with a hammer, the soft, broken melody continued. The new photo appeared the next morning. She was asleep in her bed. The angle suggested it had been taken from inside her room. She left the house within hours, never to return. The jewelry box she buried in a wooded area several miles away. But she swears, sometimes in the dead of night she hears the warped melody again, soft and slow, like it's getting closer.
Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 2.
A few years ago, a woman named Marissa from Little Rock, Arkansas, stumbled across a yard sale on her way home from work. It was held at a rundown property on the outskirts of town, more weeds than grass in the yard, an appealing yard sale today sign tacked to a splintering fence. It was the kind of place you'd usually avoid, but something about it caught her eye. She said it felt like she was being pulled in, almost like she had to stop. The sale looked like any other at first: old books, cracked kitchenware, worn-out toys. No one seemed to be running it. There was no table with cash or even a person to ask questions. Marissa called out, but no one answered. She was about to leave when she spotted a wooden box on the edge of a blanket near the porch steps. It looked out of place, sturdy, polished, and clearly much newer than the rest of the junk. The lid was carved with intricate symbols she didn't recognize. It had no hinges or lock, just a small bronze latch that barely held it shut. She picked it up. It was strangely warm to the touch, almost pulsing, she later said, like it had a heartbeat. Curious and slightly unnerved, she decided to buy it, though no one ever came out to take her money. She left a $20 bill on the porch and walked away. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her dog, Leo, wouldn't stop barking at the corner of the room where she'd placed the box. When she went to move it into a closet, she found the latch open, even though she hadn't touched it since getting home. Inside was nothing but a small, brittle strip of yellowed paper with 5 words written in smudged red ink. "You brought it back here." She didn't understand what that meant. She didn't remember ever seeing the box before. But something shifted in the air from that point on. Lights in her house began to flicker. Doors she'd locked were found wide open. She heard whispering in the middle of the night, always in the same voice, low, raspy, almost choking on each syllable. It repeated the same question: "Why did you bring me back?" Marissa began researching the symbols carved into the box. Most led nowhere, but one finally matched an old sigil used in 17th century European demonology. It was associated with a nameless entity that binds itself to a soul through forgotten belongings. The legend claimed this entity haunted individuals who unknowingly reclaimed items they had once cast away in a past life, objects meant to remain lost. Over the next few days, Marissa's health deteriorated rapidly. Her friends said she looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. She barely ate. Her voice dropped to a whisper, and she constantly complained of feeling watched. Her dog stopped entering her room entirely and eventually disappeared from her backyard one night without a trace. The police were called after her neighbors saw her outside in the middle of the night, standing motionless in her yard, barefoot in the freezing cold, staring at the street with the box clutched tightly to her chest. When officers arrived the next morning, the house was empty. No signs of forced entry. The doors were locked from the inside. Her car was still there, but Marissa was gone. The only thing left behind was the box. It was found on her kitchen table, still open, still warm. The piece of paper had changed. It now read, "It remembers you now." The house has been empty ever since. Locals say they sometimes see someone moving behind the curtains, even though the property has no utilities and no one's been inside in years. Others swear they've seen a barefoot woman standing in the yard at night, holding something tightly against her chest, never blinking, never moving, just staring down the road. Some say that yard sale was never real. No one remembers seeing it except her. But every so often, stories pop up from other towns about someone finding a wooden box at a yard sale that doesn't make sense, one that feels too warm, too alive, and is filled with something that should have stayed forgotten.
Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 3.
There was a yard sale in the outskirts of Benton, Illinois that no one talks about anymore. It happened in the summer of 2018 when a woman named Denise, who had recently moved into an old farmhouse inherited from her late uncle, decided to clear out decades of hoarded items by hosting a sale. She advertised it in town, listing everything from antique tools to porcelain dolls, old records, and handmade furniture. But what caught the attention of most visitors was a small wooden box, about the size of a shoebox, covered in old Hebrew writing, sealed shut with melted wax and thick, rusted nails. Denise didn't even remember finding it. She claimed it was just sitting on the corner of a table in the barn when she was setting things up. She chalked it up to one of the many bizarre artifacts her uncle collected during his years abroad. Curious shoppers kept asking about it, but she insisted it wasn't for sale. Still, every hour or so, someone would approach and offer more money. One man reportedly offered $500 cash. But Denise said something about the box made her deeply uneasy, like it was breathing when she got too close. That evening, as she packed up the remaining items, she found the box gone. Thinking someone must have stolen it, she went through her receipts but couldn't find any record of a purchase. Oddly, the $500 offer hadn't come with a name or a face she remembered. She thought about calling the police, but it felt ridiculous to report a missing old box she didn't want to sell in the first place. 3 days later, she started hearing things in the house. First, footsteps upstairs while she was in the kitchen, then dragging sounds down the hallway at night. Her dog, Murphy, refused to enter the living room and would growl at empty corners. At one point, Denise tried to sleep in her truck outside, only to wake up with her truck keys inside the house, on the kitchen counter. She lived alone. The box showed up again, this time sitting on her front porch at dawn with the wax and nails removed. The lid was slightly cracked open. When she opened it all the way, she found an old Polaroid photo of a man standing in a field of scorched grass and something in the background that didn't look human. Its limbs were far too long. Its eyes looked like they had been scratched into the photo with a knife. She threw the box into the fireplace and lit a fire. But even as the flames grew, the box didn't burn, not even the photo. The wood blackened, the wax hissed, but nothing caught. In a panic, she doused it in lighter fluid. Still, it only steamed. That night, Denise disappeared. A neighbor found the house abandoned the next morning, coffee still hot on the table, and Murphy pacing by the front door. Her phone was on the charger, her car in the driveway, her wallet on the counter. There were no signs of struggle. But every window in the house had been covered in smeared handprints from the inside, dozens, maybe hundreds of them. The kind that looked like someone had been trying to claw their way out. The police searched for months, dredging nearby ponds, interviewing townsfolk. They found nothing. But the box, now completely intact, as if it had never been opened, was discovered in the barn. This time, there was a different photo inside, one of Denise. Her expression blank, her eyes cloudy, standing in the exact same scorched field as the man in the earlier picture. Behind her, barely visible, was the same long-limbed figure, crouching in the shadows. The farmhouse was later sold at auction, but no one has ever been able to stay in it for more than a few nights. Some say they hear Denise's voice whispering at night. Others report waking up to dozens of Polaroids scattered across the floor, all featuring people who were never there before. And that yard sale? People in Benton don't go to them anymore, especially not when they're out near the old farmhouse off Route 14, because no one really knows what Denise inherited that summer, but whatever it was, it didn't want to be sold.
Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 4.
It was late May, and Alyssa had just moved into a new neighborhood in rural Missouri. She was a collector, old toys, porcelain dolls, vintage clocks, anything with history, and that weekend, a yard sale ad taped to a gas station window caught her eye. A state yard sale, everything must go, Saturday only, 10 a.m., it read in fading ink. The address was only 15 minutes away, a perfect excuse to explore the area and maybe find something interesting. She arrived at the house a little after 10. It sat off a dirt road, half covered by vines, with an overgrown yard and an uneven gravel driveway. The house looked abandoned, but tables were set up across the lawn, loaded with dusty trinkets, books with brittle pages, antique lamps, chipped china, and boxes of old photographs. A short man, maybe in his 70s, with thick glasses and a hearing aid, stood behind one of the tables. He gave Alyssa a polite nod, but said nothing. As she browsed, Alyssa felt drawn to a small wooden box sitting on the corner of a folding table. It was unmarked, just plain oak with a simple brass latch. When she opened it, inside was a strange figurine, about the size of her hand. It looked hand-carved, humanoid but distorted, its mouth open too wide, and its arms twisted behind its back. The detail was grotesque, almost unsettling. Alyssa was immediately fascinated. "How much for this?" she asked. The old man looked up, and for the first time, really noticed her. He squinted and asked, "You sure you want that one?" "I do," she said, and without a word, he waved his hand as if to say, "Take it." When she got home, Alyssa placed the figurine on a shelf in her bedroom near her other finds. That night, as she got into bed, she had the overwhelming feeling that something was watching her. At first, she chalked it up to moving stress, the unfamiliar surroundings. But when she turned toward the shelf, she thought she saw the figurine had shifted. Not much, just a fraction. She shook her head. Probably just didn't place it evenly. She didn't sleep well. Over the next few days, things got weirder. Every morning, the figurine was in a slightly different position. It faced different angles. Sometimes its arm was lifted more than before. Once, it was completely upside down. She lived alone, and no one else had a key. On the fourth night, she woke up to the sound of scratching, not on the wall, but on her floor. When she turned on the light, the figurine was sitting at the edge of her bed. She screamed and threw it into the hallway. Her heart was racing so hard she thought she'd pass out. In the morning, it was gone. She searched the house. Nothing. She even considered she might have imagined it all. But that evening, while brushing her teeth, she heard a thud in the attic. She hadn't been up there yet. Grabbing a flashlight, she climbed the narrow steps and opened the creaky door. The attic was mostly empty, except in the far corner where the figurine was sitting on an old blanket, surrounded by photographs. Her photographs. Ones she didn't remember being taken. Pictures of her sleeping, brushing her hair, cooking, all printed on old Polaroid film, yellowing at the edges. Terrified, she burned the figurine in a fire pit behind her house. It screamed. Not a crackle or pop like wood, an actual shrill scream. It was so loud her ears rang for minutes afterward. Thinking it was over, she tried to move on. Weeks passed with no more activity. But then one morning, she received a package on her porch. No return address. Inside was a photograph. It showed her standing in her living room from the angle of someone outside the window. On the back in messy handwriting, "You were never supposed to take it." Alyssa moved out of the house within days. She told the police. They never found anything. That yard sale never showed up in any county records. The address she visited? It had burned down in 1994. Locals say the man who lived there vanished without a trace. The house had been empty ever since.
Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 5.
A few years ago, in the outskirts of a small town in Kentucky, a woman named Cheryl decided to stop at a yard sale on her way home from work. It was one of those impromptu sales in the middle of nowhere, just off a rural road. A weathered sign painted in red letters reading "Yard Sale, 1 day only," leaned against a crooked mailbox. The driveway was long and gravelly, winding past tall hedges toward a rundown farmhouse that looked like it hadn't seen a coat of paint in decades. Cheryl was a collector of odd antiques and thought maybe she'd find a hidden gem. The front yard was littered with tables covered in old dolls, vintage tools, rusted kitchenware, and boxes of books with mildewed pages. No one greeted her at first, but eventually a man in his 60s came around from behind the house. He was tall and gaunt, with deep eye sockets and yellowed teeth. He didn't say much, just nodded and motioned for her to look around. Cheryl was browsing a box of porcelain dolls when she spotted something half buried under a tarp near a broken-down wagon. It was a framed photograph, probably from the early 1900s. The picture showed a family of 5 standing stiffly in front of a barn, 2 adults and 3 children. But there was something off about it. The children's faces were blurred, not by the age of the photo, but almost as if they were scratched out deliberately. The frame was heavy and cold to the touch, and she noticed small nail-like symbols carved into the wood on the back. When she asked the man how much he wanted for it, he looked surprised, almost alarmed. He hesitated, then said, $2, in a voice so soft she had to lean in to hear it. When she paid him, he didn't take the bill from her hand. He just let her set it on the table. That night, Cheryl hung the photo in her living room. She felt strangely compelled to look at it, drawn to the blurriness of the children's faces. Around midnight, her dog started barking uncontrollably at the wall where the photo hung. She got up to check, but found nothing. Still, she felt uneasy and decided to take the picture down and put it in the garage. The next morning, there were 3 small handprints smeared in soot on her living room wall, right where the photo had been. Cheryl didn't have kids. Her dog refused to enter the room. Over the next week, things got worse. She heard footsteps pacing in her hallway at night and soft whispering from inside her bedroom closet. One night, she woke up to the sound of sobbing outside her window, only to find 3 small shapes standing in her backyard. When she turned on the porch light, they were gone, but tiny wet footprints led up to her back door. Terrified, she returned to the farmhouse where she bought the picture, hoping to find the man and get some kind of explanation. But when she pulled into the driveway, the house was burned out, just a charred foundation and blackened walls. A neighbor told her it had burned down over 15 years ago. No one had lived there since. Cheryl drove straight to a local historian, desperate for answers. The woman recognized the barn in the photo and pulled out old newspaper clippings. In 1921, the family who lived on that property was murdered. Parents and 3 children, all found bound and burned inside their barn. The killer was never caught, but strange symbols had been found carved into the barn's beams, the same ones Cheryl had seen on the back of the frame. She tried to destroy the photo. First, she burned it, but the flames never touched the image. Then she tried to bury it, but every time she went back to the garage, it was sitting right on the shelf where she first left it. Her dog disappeared one night without a trace. She started seeing the shapes inside the house, not just outside. Small figures darting behind furniture, always just out of focus. Cheryl moved 6 months later, abandoning everything she owned, including the house. The new owners reportedly tore it down after only 3 weeks, claiming something was wrong with the property. No one's lived there since. And as for the photo, no one knows where it ended up. But there have been reports in nearby towns of yard sales popping up unexpectedly, always on back roads, always with old items no one remembers bringing. And sometimes, if you're unlucky, there's a photo half hidden under a tarp, waiting for someone curious enough to take it home.
Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 6.
It was the last weekend of September when Julie decided to stop at a yard sale on her way home from her sister's house. The sign had been handwritten, barely legible, nailed to a crooked wooden stake at the edge of a gravel road. Something about it felt off. No address, just yard sale today, and an arrow. Still, it was the kind of road that promised old rare finds, not the mass-produced junk people usually sold. Julie turned off the main highway and followed the arrow. She drove for almost 15 minutes with no signs of life in sight, just tall trees, rusting fences, and a sense of isolation that kept building. Finally, she spotted a clearing. An old 2-story farmhouse sat at the end of a long dirt driveway. In front of it, tables were set up haphazardly with items strewn across them, faded dolls, cracked picture frames, mismatched shoes, and boxes of books that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. There was no one around. No sellers, no shoppers, just an eerie silence, broken only by the wind rustling the yellowing leaves. Julie hesitated, then got out of her car. The air was colder than it should have been for early fall. She walked up to the tables, drawn to a wooden box filled with old Polaroids. They were black and white, most of them blurry, taken in what looked like the same house she was standing in front of. But there was something deeply wrong with them. In every photo, someone's face was either turned away, scratched out, or covered with what looked like dark smudges, like soot or dried blood. Then she noticed something else. In the background of several photos, there was always the same figure, a tall man in overalls, just standing in corners or behind doors, almost hidden, but always there. Julie's stomach turned. She put the photos back in the box, but as she did, something caught her eye inside the house. A movement in the upper window, a curtain shifting, but when she looked more closely, she saw a figure standing perfectly still behind the glass. It was the man from the photos. She backed away from the table and turned to leave. That's when she saw it. Her car was gone, not moved, gone. The long driveway she'd just driven up was now nothing but tall grass and woods, with no tire tracks, no sign that anyone had been there. Panic set in fast. Julie turned and sprinted back toward the house, hoping to use a phone or maybe just get help. But when she reached the porch, the door was already open. Inside, the house was dark, even though it was still afternoon. The air smelled musty, like wet soil and decay. She stepped in, calling out for help, and the door slammed shut behind her with a violent crack. She couldn't find the knob. The hallway stretched on far longer than the house should have allowed. The walls were lined with photos, new ones. Every one of them was of her. Walking up the driveway, looking through the photos, panicking, Julie's breath caught in her throat. Then, from the end of the hall, the man in overalls appeared. Same as in the photos, face unreadable, arms hanging limp, unmoving, but his head tilted slowly, as if curious. She ran. Every door she tried was locked. The floorboards groaned beneath her. The ceiling above her began to creak, and faint laughter echoed somewhere in the walls. Eventually, she found a staircase and stumbled down into the basement. It was worse than she expected. The walls were lined with tables, more yard sale items, but each was bloodstained or broken. A child's shoe with dried blood on the toe, a jewelry box with human teeth inside. And in the far corner, a table held a single item, a new Polaroid camera, still warm to the touch. Julie backed away, but the camera clicked by itself. A photo slid out. She picked it up, trembling. It was a picture of her in the basement, holding the photo she was looking at. But behind her, the man was standing, closer than before. The light went out. No one ever found Julie. The yard sale was never seen again. Her sister filed a missing persons report, but there were no leads. Just a rumor that sometimes, deep in the back roads, you'll see a hand-painted sign nailed to a crooked post that reads, "Yard sale today." And if you follow it, you might just end up in the next Polaroid.